So running an app as big as Figma must come with some challenges. Like you serve countless customers, you have collaboration, which has to happen on the back end. So what have been some of like the challenges of deploying and running Figma at scale?
Yeah, there are like a lot of bespoke challenges. I like to think I've had like a fairly diverse career and seen a lot of different architectures and stuff. And I feel like Figma is one of the most unique. What a lot of people don't recognize is that Figma is like a traditional web application, but it's also like a game engine. And not only are we like using these lower level technologies, we're also building kind of our own low level in memory abstractions for doing rendering and managing the like file format and scene graph. We're not always using like standard DOM and whatnot. And so we have like sort of like the same set of challenges that any kind of large scale web application would have, but we also have a lot of the challenges that like building like a game engine like Unity or Unreal would have in terms of or an operating system or a browser or something like that. And so we have like really we always like to say that like it doesn't like a lot of people I think traditionally have thought of like backend as being like harder problems because like you're even in simple applications you can run into these like complex scaling problems. But at Figma, I think like some of our hardest problems are actually on the front end. And we also have some pretty challenging back end problems. So like the kind of problems we run into is on the front end, we have to create this experience that feels like a native desktop application. We don't ever want to like slow down someone's ability to go from an idea to a visualization of that idea and by waiting on a server or something like that. And we also want to make sure that people can co-create in real time. It really helps to like maintain that single source of truth and not have diverging explorations. And to do all of that, we have to basically load a lot of things at once and make sure that they don't use too much memory or too many system resources and slow down the experience as a result. And so we end up with these massive files with hundreds of different pages and complex dependencies and relationships because a lot of like what we do is we bring in kind of abstractions from programming languages into the design tool ecosystem, and all of these things have to be kind of run in a way that ensures that they feel local and they feel immediate. So the user is never getting slowed down waiting for a slow network or waiting for someone else's change to propagate to their machine. And so it's just a lot of like traditional engineering optimization work. Like I like to joke that there was this meme in the Silicon Valley that like, why do people ask these weird algorithm questions? And we definitely had some, but they were like literally the things that we had to work on at Figma every day. They were super relevant. And I think a lot of these questions came from people building early operating systems and game engines and browsers and whatnot. And so in our case, it was actually very relevant to what people would do. And then I think the other thing that I think is easy to kind of miss is that everything we do in Figma essentially operates like this eventually consistent distributed data store. So each Figma file is being simultaneously like, checkpointed in our infrastructure and then also streamed as quickly as possible in real time to all the other connected clients. And it means that not only do we have to build all of this like kind of real time infrastructure and have extremely high write throughput and whatnot, um, but also every single feature we build you have to kind of reason about it as like a distributed system, like this eventually consistent system. And so a lot of the like, the basic product features that I think people take for granted, which are, inspired by programming languages are kind of built in a way where they actually need to be like, or work like a programming language, which I think people appreciate is kind of complicated, but also like work knowing that they're going to be streamed, through these network connected devices and have to come kind of make sense and be eventually consistent and correct when they eventually kind of recreate themselves on different people's computers. So those are the kind of like bespoke challenges I think that we run into at Figma that a lot of people don't always realize.
Yeah, I can't imagine the sort of like scale and complexity of that. Just like the rendering problems alone, it's like you just want to like render sort of like what someone's seeing, but as they scroll, you want it to be performant, responsive. It's a wild problem. Um, Maybe let's switch gears a little bit and talk about some of the sort of like new features and new work that you're doing. So you recently announced dev mode. So what is dev mode and how does it make handoff simpler?
Yeah. As I mentioned earlier, I think like early on in Figma's history, we knew that like our end users weren't just professional designers; they were also developers that they work with and product managers and everyone else around them. And And so early on, we actually did have some pretty basic inspection features that enabled developers to go into a file and start to kind of look at things from the perspective of like what a developer actually needs to consume. So, for example, like rather than just kind of visualizing colors in the properties panel, you could actually see the hex code for colors, or you could see some basic CSS snippets and whatnot. And we knew that people found that functionality valuable, but we also knew that we needed to go a lot further to really kind of deliver on this promise of helping people go from design to production as quickly as possible. And so the sort of initial premise of dev mode was like we needed to create a mode in Figma that could really truly be tailored to the needs of productionization of designs without compromising on the core design experience, without cluttering the UI or taking things away. And so we launched dev mode with that premise and a bunch of improved features for developers, including the ability to very quickly find parts of a very large design file that are actually ready for development. So we have this feature called Ready for Dev, so designers can tag things. And then developers are taken into like a curated view of the file that shows them exactly what they need. And then we've also really like up-leveled all of our inspection features to generate code in different languages. And also built out, yet another kind of plugin extension framework for developers, so that developers could access plugins, which previously were only available to people who had edit access to files. And those plugins do everything from, add new kind of forms of code gen to doing full screen code gen, to integrating with other development tools like Jira and whatnot. And then we also built a sort of parallel view for developers inside of Visual Studio Code, so that you can get all this information contextually, and we can start to surface things as you're working on the code, rather than you having to context switch between these different experiences. So that's how dev mode started, and it's evolved a lot over the years, and we have like big plans for it in the future too. We're still I think it's kind of basically still in its infancy, but some of the new stuff we're really excited about is one of the like kind of key pain points that a lot of teams face is they put all this effort into building these design systems. And the design systems, I think, like as engineers, we all kind of know, like we've had code libraries, shared code libraries that, created these reusable UI elements for probably decades. But the idea of like a design system and a design tool didn't really catch on until the last decade. And one of the benefits beyond just like making designers more efficient and, helping them kind of get ideas into a format that other people react to faster is that it actually creates this sort of higher level abstraction for communicating with engineers and reusing existing code, and ultimately creating more accessible, consistent experiences across your products. And so we've been working with a number of our customers who had been building kind of internal prototypes and internal tools to connect their Figma design systems to code, so that it's very clear that like there is already code that your team should be using, right? Because sometimes like we build these like complex engineering design systems, but then we struggle to get people to use them. People like end up recreating the same button over and over again. You get all this accidental complexity, and one button's accessible, the other one's not, or whatnot. And so now with dev mode, we have this ability in code to configure the mapping of your code libraries, like say your kind of Swift UI framework or your React frameworks, and the corresponding design systems in Figma, so that when you're inspecting files, you can see not just which code component to use, but exactly how to use it to recreate the exact same parameterization that you have in the design file. And this has been something that a lot of our customers have been super excited about. And I think it's just like the beginning of thinking about how to help people kind of go from design to existing code faster, which I think in some ways is more important than generating new code. Generating new code isn't always the hard part. It's actually a fairly mechanical process. The hard part is generating code that reuses the code you already have, so you're not creating a lot of accidental complexity and duplication.
So like in that, if I'm creating like a menu for my design system, what is it like to hook up the menu to the menu code? Like, can I like render a menu and then like Figma somehow figures out like what the components might be, or is it like all manual and I'm just like adding links and like docs directly into Figma?
Yeah, so that's how we started. So when we first released dev mode, you could like attach links to components, and they would be accessible anywhere instances of the component was used. But Code Connect takes that a step further. So it's fairly easy to understand in basic. The way it works is we basically provide a bunch of kind of framework specific, language specific code as configuration libraries, so that you can go into your code base and you can create these code connect configuration files that essentially more declaratively show us how a Figma component's structure, like the properties and parameters that you pass into it, and the code component structure, properties and parameters you pass into it, map to one another. So that when we see like an instance of like a menu or something in Figma, we can figure out the corresponding code component for mobile or for web, and also the corresponding set of parameters you need to pass into that code component to recreate the same kind of state and configuration and look and feel. So at a very basic level, it's a convenience layer to build a mapping from like a Figma component to a code output, like a framework specific code output. What I'm really excited about though is that it's manual right now, and even though it's a little tedious, I think you get pretty good economies of scale out of setting it up. But I think it can also be automated over time, and I think there's a huge opportunity to just more automatically go from whatever's in your design tool to your coding environment and help to reconcile these things and even give you more visibility into where there is duplication and where there's opportunity for consolidation.